The future of talk is here. Power 102 Digital.
Let me say a very special good afternoon to you. This is Hard Talk, Power 102 Digital Monday, hosted by Karen Nunez Tesheira. Good afternoon, Karen.
Good afternoon to you, David. And of course, we have a special guest, no stranger to anyone, and no stranger even to this show. This is the second time we've had the honor and privilege of having him on, David Abdullah. And so we say good afternoon to everyone. And of course, to you, Daddy Mac, who, as I always say in every show, without your support in many ways, I'm not quite sure that I would be able to hopefully deliver on a Monday or a Tuesday, as the case may be. But today's a good Monday, bright, shiny day. And I think we have a lot to unpack. And here to help us unpack it and help me to understand it too, because I have to say, David Abdullah, that I really did try my best over the last few days to have a relook at all the data and all the information. And sometimes I wondered if at least to a certain extent, the lack of clarity and that there is, as it is as it's reported in the newspaper, was not somewhat, was not helpful. I'll put it that way. But before I introduce you formally, I'm going to ask David McIntyre to do what we need to do every time we're on this show, and which I'm I'm a bit regretful about, which is, of course, this show is intended to encourage people to call in. And I hope, David Abdullah, you must have a lot of people from your from your union. The union is still there, but of whom you were a member, listening in, and we want to hear their comments, their contributions, their questions, because everything that anyone says on the show that is relevant to the show, I hope, is going to be helpful to the country. So what we want to do, to say to people at the very outset, and David McIntyre is going to let you have the numbers, and David, also too, if someone is shy, not wanting to come on, I know they send you comments, and if you do get them, I'm sure David Abdullah or myself, have a feeling more David and I will be better placed to answer the question. So if you can do the needful, and we get on with welcoming the show more officially. So if you can go ahead, David.
Okay, the numbers you can connect with us here. Those numbers are 222-8255, 222-8255, 612-8255, 612-8255, and our toll-free number 866-525-1099. Toll-free 866-525-1099. And you can send your comments via Facebook also, and I'll read them out to Karen and David.
Yes, and I'm not sure if I should say it on air, but and I'm a technophobe, but I am very much a technophobe in the sense that I'm not familiar, but a technophile in the sense that I totally support us going in the way of a digitalization with all the proper regulatory infrastructure in place before we do that. That's absolutely necessary. And I'm saying that I wish we could have the numbers put up so that people can just, if they're looking on, they just look and see the numbers and they can utilize the numbers. But nevertheless, please feel free to call. So before I go further.
1 minute, Karen. We also have a WhatsApp number of 318-1021. You can send your message via WhatsApp at 318-1021. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, thank you so much. And I try to organize in my disorganization, but so there's method in it. So David Abdullah is no stranger to anyone. I don't think if you lived in Trinidad at any time that you're not familiar with the name, or I know it's not relevant to the show, but of course his deceased father, who was the head of the
Karen, please. I saw my dad last night.
Oh my God!
Don't say
I put it out. Oh my God!
Deceased.
Oh my God! But you see, he's so quiet.
He was he wasn't he wasn't that,
Okay, well, my
bubbly last
apologies.
night, but he was alive. My
Okay,
mom
alive
passed
and
away.
kicking, and my father
Well,
said kicking
I
and being
wouldn't I
kicked.
wouldn't say kicking. I wouldn't say kicking. You were being kicked now. My mom passed away a year and a few months ago, but daddy's
Oh
still
yeah.
very much alive. Yes.
My apologies, but you know what? You just did in indirectly without intending to do that, which is a credit to you. Although you would say no because that's not your nature. You just said I saw him yesterday. There's so many people who won't be able to say, "Oh, when last time I saw my father? About 2 months ago." Oh yeah, but I spoke to him about so months ago. So I take my apologies, of course,
Okay.
and of course it's a testimony to your being a good son, which is what all parents want as they get
Right.
older. And so I'm not not go any more into that because I think I stepped on some thorns there unintentionally. But we all know the name David Abdullah in an event, and I can still say because of the legacy, because legacy is always important. The most important legacy is not wealth; it's the legacy of a name, and he did just have the legacy of his father, who was a former Archbishop of the Anglican Church. And I think he can be very, very much proud of. And I have a feeling that had a lot to do with the course on which he took his life. And that was, first of all, at university, at which I knew him. Yes, we were at university at the same time. Don't be surprised. I don't know what you tell me which one surprising you more. I don't want to hear. But anyway, my training, he is an economist, and but he's obviously been a person who is very much involved in community and social work. Is not, there's no question about that. He has devoted his life literally to just that, because your parents can do what they want to do and try to direct you in a particular way, but you certainly don't have to follow it and make that your life calling. And he has done that. And why do I say that? Because at the ripe old age of 19, the ripe old age of 19, he was the treasurer of the guild, I think, in Jamaica. You were at the University of the West Indies. Is Trinidad, you in Trinidad
No.
too? I know I'm new in Trinidad, but I know you.
Yeah.
You're
Yeah.
Jamaican accent. Yeah,
At
but
18.
huh?
At 18. I was 18.
At
I was
18?
18 when I became
Well, you know,
treasurer of
but
the
your
guild.
bio needs to be
And I
corrected. It said 19.
was president of the guild at 19. Yeah.
Oh my God! But I will tell you what I had, and perhaps I didn't read it correctly. I was about to say you were president of the guild at 24. Oh, but I think no, you
No,
were the chief
no,
executive
no, no,
officer,
no.
chief executive officer of the
Chief
OWTU,
education,
chief
chief
education
educational research
officer.
officer at
You
24.
know,
Yes.
I think I'm going to let you introduce yourself. Oh, at the OWTU
I
in,
can't. We don't. Yeah, we don't need
24.
to go. We don't. We
No,
don't
but
need
you
to go
do
into
need
all
to.
of.
You know
We don't
why?
need to
You
go
know
into
why
all
you
that
need
detail.
to? You don't need to do it.
Yeah, I mean,
And
yeah.
you don't need to do it. But I tell you why we need to do it. And sometimes, okay, you come from a Christian background, and you know, a lot of people come from, regardless of whatever, most people have some faith in something and someone. And one of the things I can't really say that I can quote Bible and verse. I really can't. But I think I'm pretty good at in terms of my beliefs, spiritual beliefs. But you know, you said you don't hide your candle under bushel. You know, there's two sayings that tell you, of course, they tell you to be modest and so on. Yes, that's true. But sometimes you cannot always be modest, because when you take a leadership role, people look up to you. And when they look up to you, they have to feel assured that the person they're looking up to says, well, this is a person who has devoted his life to social work and has risen in leadership positions. Because at the end of the day, you know, we've had that discussion on at another forum, but that discussion is you can't get around leadership, which is why when they want to kill a movement, literally and otherwise, you go for the leader. Not that we are suggesting anything of that nature, but what I'm saying is leadership is absolutely key. So we can never underestimate it, not because we're talking about David Abdullah and picking him up. We're talking about David Abdullah, the leader, and someone, therefore, who has proven himself to be a leader time and time again. And in areas of our national community, which are very important, many may not have, because it's not exactly, I'm sure he didn't make a bundle pursuing that course. as in the OWTU and was there for 4 decades, devoted 4 decades of his life to that, and making it one of the most, if not the most powerful union in the country. And I know a little bit more, having spoken to him previously, but just to say, they're not just, they have been a union that kind of leading the way in terms of investment, in terms of taking away the image that you may have of, organizations as they evolve over time. And he has certainly played a big part. But he's not only been in that role, and it's not really a change, it's just a transition, a continuation of who he is, become the political leader of the movement for social justice. And I know I have that right.
Yes. Yes.
I have that right. I know I have that right. And
Yeah.
and that is because, and look at the name, right?
Yeah.
Movement for social justice, because obviously that's what he has committed his life. And I don't think many of us can say that, I'm not going off a little bit on a tangent, but we have a lot of time, David. You probably will go very fast, but I really want to say, as I get the chance today, to say that there are very few people who stay the course. Very, very few people who stay the course. After a while, get frustrated, get disillusioned, get cynical, or whatever it is, and you have proven that you have stayed the course, and your commitment to the union, which is to getting better conditions for workers. And we know the days of Buzz Butler, and it's horrific. And you have continued that course regardless of the challenges you have faced. So we're going to be talking today about Petrotrin and its closure. And there's so many things I'm going to let you really kind of lead off. Not only lead off, help me a lot. Because I think when I say help me, I mean me, the audience, because I think it's going to be important, because I think there's a lot of ambiguity or lack of, I don't want to say obfuscation, but a lack of clarity, I think. And I don't know if it's intentional. I don't know if it is just how the media has reported it. I really cannot see. But I have a few things I'm going to just read off, and then I'm going to leave you and probably interject where I think I would hopefully be helpful. I think people have to know who was Petrotrin. I don't think people really know who was Petrotrin. And of course, that fateful day in 2018, August 2018, when our Prime Minister made this announcement that he was closing it down, and did do that by November, I think at the end of November 2018, which is why you celebrated 5 years. I hope you're going to correct me and tell me, is it 28th?
Correct. Yes, it was. You're correct. It was 2018, and the announcement was made at the end of August to the union by the chairman of the board, and then later by the prime minister. And the last day that the company operated as an operating company called Petrotrin was the 30th of November 2018. So you're right there. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. I feel much better. But in any event, all joking aside, I think I think people still have not come to terms with, and the very fact, even if it was a symposium that was organized by the OWTU, even if it were organized by them, the very fact that 5 years later, there's so much lack of clarity, and so much people still questioning, should it have been closed? And you have one of the newspapers talking about it should have been closed. Then others say, no, it should not have been closed. Then you have the Joint Select Committee that they had in 2016 looking at it, and what could you have done to have kept it in operation. So there's so much, even to this day, there's so much conversation as to whether that was the right thing. So I'm going to ask you, from your perspective, and you really do have the floor to answer the multi-million-dollar question. But it must be, according to the Prime Minister, the bullet point question of US, I think 750 million that was coming up in 2019. But in any event, and other things. But I want you to talk us through who was Petrotrin. Yes, how big it was, how many plants, how large the entity was. And yes, it is there maybe 100 years, I understood. But just talk us through to understand, was that really the way to go, or were there alternatives that could and should have been explored? Just that first starting.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Karen. So let me just add one or two things in terms of my what I've done in Trinidad and Tobago. I mean, quite apart from what you said, yes, I was treasurer of the guild at 18. My first year, I was president of the guild. My second year, and so on. When I was 19, I contested elections for the original ULF for the Tunapuna seat when I was 21, going on 22 in 1976. And then I joined the union in 77, became head of the education department in 78, became executive treasurer, and still holding the position of head of the education department in 82. So I was 28 when I became executive treasurer of the union and continued in the union. But in terms of some of my public service, of course, I chaired the board of the Cipriani College of Labor and Cooperative Studies between 2002 and about early 2009, which was the period of the largest expansion of the college. I also served on the boards of the EMA and the Bureau of Standards at different points in time. I was a member of the so-called Lashley Committee that looked into cabinet appointed, that looked into the operations of Petrotrin, which was appointed in 2017. And I also served on a technical committee appointed by cabinet to look at 4 state enterprises in the late 1990s, appointed by the Pandey government. Those were the ADB, Tantique, Petrotrin, and Caroni. Caroni was then removed, so we looked at 3. And I've served on, a committee set up by the Chief Justice to look at civil proceedings rules, committee set up by the Law Association to look at the appointment of judges. So, although I'm not a lawyer like you, so I've done stuff in
thank God.
in politics, in law, and across the board in environmental management and so on, standards. So I've had quite an extensive experience in public service. And apart from being, of course, a senator for 2 years until I left. So let me just come to the question of Petrotrin. The very short answer to your question is no, it need not have and should not have been closed down. And what has gone on in much of the public domain, why there's confusion or uncertainty, is essentially because of the false narratives that were articulated and then perpetuated by the government from 2018 to now. So let me make the first point. There was never a single study, not a single study, that recommended the closure of Petrotrin. Not the Lashley Committee. We did not recommend the closure of Petrotrin. We recommended a restructuring of governance to have the board appointed in a different way to remove political party considerations in the appointment of the board, and to ensure that the board would have continuity beyond a 5-year election cycle. Secondly, we recommended the restructuring of the company in terms of creating 2 distinct business units, one for exploration and production, one for refining and marketing, that would have had heading each of those units an officer, executive officer of the company, executive manager, who would be totally responsible for whatever happened in that business unit, rather than trying to create a set of bureaucracy and so on with an executive management team, with a CEO and so on. So we recommended a separation of the functions because exploration and production is a very different kind of function from refining and marketing. So those are those are the 2 main recommendations that we made, and anybody can Google the Lashley report. It's available online, and you could see exactly what the recommendations were. So the Lashley Committee did not recommend the closure of Petrotrin. The government, subsequent to the Lashley Committee, the board subsequent to the Lashley Committee hired 2 international consulting firms, Solomon Associates, which normally does engineering and efficiency studies, and McKinsey and Associates, which is a kind of a management consultancy firm, to also look at what was going on. Now, these companies had done studies prior to 2018. In fact, they did studies by a previous board in 2016. We had those reports available to us in the Lashley Committee in 2017. In 2016, neither McKinsey nor Solomon recommended the closure of Petrotrin. In 2018, neither McKinsey nor Solomon recommended the closure of Petrotrin. What then did the government use to make a decision to close Petrotrin? They used 3 PowerPoint slides. 3 PowerPoint slides that had been produced by McKinsey, and that is what they used to make a decision. Now, you cannot make a decision about a complex, major company, the largest state company in the country, not only in terms of its economic activity, but in terms of its footprint. And in terms, let me just change my pod, and in terms of its, the fact, three PowerPoint. Are you hearing now? Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. You cannot make that decision on the basis of 3 PowerPoint slides. Okay, but that is what they made a decision on. And not
And
a
what are
single
those
individual.
PowerPoint slides? So what were those PowerPoint slides?
SPD had shown it at some of the public fora. I don't have them in front of me right now, but they were trying to do kind of revenue expenditure, cash flow kind of thing that showed that, according to those slides, without any supporting evidential information, that the situation was problematic for Petrotrin. Okay, but you cannot go on the basis of 3 PowerPoint slides. So let me make the point as well that during the industrial court matter in September, October 2018, as after the announcement of the closure had been made, the union took the Petrotrin to the industrial court by reporting an industrial relations offense. And Mr. Espinay, Wilfred Espinay, then chairman of the board, when asked by Douglas Mendes, senior counsel, who made the decision to close Petrotrin, he could not answer that question. He said, the numbers made the decision. Now, I don't know how the numbers is personified in anybody, but he was asked the question 3 or 4 times, and each time he said, the numbers made the decision. So he up to now, he would not admit who made the decision. I believe that is because the board did not make the decision, but the decision was made by the Prime Minister and maybe some members of the Energy Subcommittee, not all members of the Energy Subcommittee. So on the basis of 3 PowerPoint slides, without any other
Can I just say this too? I think I had a quotation from him around that time when he said that there was no intention to sell or privatize Petrotrin. I think he was asked that, I think, by the media. So he himself was sending a mixed message, as far as I know, as a member of the public, that he left to him. That was not something that he was.
Well, let me clarify 2 aspects of that. Firstly, if you mentioned the 2016 the Joint Select Committee of Parliament, right? As did Dr. Nunez on last Monday in the symposium organized by the ODQ. Let me make the point that the ODQ did not have any union representatives on the panel. There were 2 independent professionals. Dr. Nunez, well-respected economist, former member of the Economic Development Advisory Board, of which I was also a member, chaired by Dr. Terence Farrell, and Mr. Tony Paul, highly respected energy professional, former chair of the Local Content Committee. He worked in the Ministry of Energy, Petrotrin, BP, and became an international consultant and so on. Highly respected expert in the energy sector. Those are the 2 people who spoke in the symposium. Now, I came in to clarify some things that Marlene had said, but I was not a panelist. Okay, so let me make that point. So the Express editorial, which criticized, said, well, the union organized it and therefore there'll be bias, was really quite a nasty, biased comment and statement by the editorial. It wasn't if it was written by a journalist or by a commentator, one could understand that's a personal opinion, but an editorial writer should not go in that direction. But let me say that there was a 2018 Joint Select Committee of Parliament, Energy, Joint Select Committee of Parliament, at which the SPD board appeared. The principal person who spoke at that was Mr. Nigel Edwards. Currently, he's the executive director of the Unit Trust Corporation, and he serves on several other state boards. But what did Mr. Nigel Edwards say? So I'm going to quote from what he said. He said that, let me just find it. He said that there were many positives, including very significant free cash flows amounting to US $270 million or 1.8 billion TT dollars between 2013 and 2017. And the board then presented its agreed plan of action, I'm now not quoting him, that would see the company generate US $1.2 billion in free cash flows between 2018, January when they appeared, and 2022. And he went on to say that the board expressed confidence that once their plan of action was implemented, the company would be able to service its debt, make payments of taxes and royalties, and expend the required amounts on capital expenditure and maintenance projects to ensure the company's asset integrity and improve operational efficiencies out of its free cash flows, and even begin to pay dividends to the shareholder, namely the government of Trinidad and Tobago.
Right, okay.
No,
Now, David,
so that,
David,
that was
let
from February 21st, 2018. Go to the Parliament website and look at what Nigel Edwards had said. No, let me just make one other point.
I don't doubt anything you're saying, you know.
Yeah,
I have to be
let me make one other point.
Okay, make your other point, and then I have to ask you this.
So that in early August of 2018, 3 weeks or two weeks before the announcement to close, the company, and this came out in the industrial court in the evidence of espionage, the company had hired an expat to be vice president of refining and marketing, in other words, to head the refinery. And the emails were laid in evidence in the industrial court, where the man was saying that he wanted to tie down his housing arrangements and all of that, right? So 2 weeks before the announcement was made to close, the company had hired, and they had to pay him, the company had hired a vice president to run the refinery. And a few weeks before that, they had hired an expat to run exploration and production of petrotrin. So 2 weeks before the announcement, the board was continually moving with its restructuring plans. No issue of closure. 2 weeks before.
All right. Now let me, because you see, obviously, me listening in, of course, you're very passionate and you're very much far more knowledgeable about the issues, and having been in a political sort of position, things go on that one is not free to express. But let me ask you, I mean, if you come into the national community, which is why even with that bad news, if you want to call it very bad news, because at the end of the day, I don't know what numbers to believe in. The first numbers was 1,500 people lost their jobs. Then it was 3,000. Right. I think that's accepted. That's not true. But then it became 3,000, and then I think the symposium, it ended up being. I went and read it back. I said, did it mean 7,000 people or families? So it says 7,000 people. So how you reach from 1,500 to 7,000? So let me just say this. The fact of the matter is, I am not one of them. I am. If you want to call me agent provocateur, but let me be that. I'm going to have to be that. Because to some people, a lot of people felt the government was able to win them over because when they saw the huge salaries that were being paid. I'm just telling you, that's where it's the same thing with the pilots. They were able to use that as about things. So what, they were looking for that?
And the salary figures given by the government was a lie too.
Okay, but I'm just telling you. Let me just finish what I'm saying. And you see, okay, so let me just finish what I'm saying, because you could tell me it's a lie, they could tell me you're lying, and then I go back and forth. The only way it's not a lie is when I have the evidential proof by way of the accounts or whatever that show that is not true. But let me just finish. So one of the things that that was brought up was that it's only 1,500 people, and anyhow 900 are slated to leave to go because they'll reach retirement age in any event. Just saying what was said. And then the other major issue was that they said that the Petrotrin owed the government huge amounts of in terms of debt. It was carrying a huge amount of debt. While they wanted to say that yes, they paid revenues in terms of the SPTs and their dividends and all of that, They were carrying a huge amount of debt. But more to the point was that bullet point that was coming up, Malcolm Jones bullet point, I think it's 850 million US dollars. Yeah, bullet payment that became due, I think, in 2019, and that the government was saying absolutely they were in no position or would put themselves in a position to pay off a bullet payment when they were actually subsidizing a company that had a huge amount of debt and were therefore a drag on the economy. So look at it from that person's point of view, that they come and say that you and they believe it. Because I know people who have said that to me and believe it. I have had people come to me who do not support this government and who have said to me, I have to respect Rowley for that, I have to respect Rowley for that. He got, even though it wasn't a good thing, it was a hard decision to make. They made him into like an anti-hero. So I am just giving you the chance to show me, you disappeared off the view, by the way, to show me that, yes, the information, why was he not right to say, just as how with the sugar economy, that it was a losing enterprise? Why was it not right to him to say that we're not going to make that bullet payment in 2019, that this entity is costing us money, has huge debt that it's carrying, and its return in terms of profits or whatever, the revenues they pay to the government, it simply does not justify its continued existence. What do you say to that person besides saying they lie? Because they'll tell you lie too. I'm not supporting anybody, I'm probably illegal training in me.
Yeah, well,
What's happening
yeah, yeah, I hear you. And the of misleading the public and telling a narrative that was not true. So the first statement was that 1,500 workers would go home, because that would be the complement of people working, well, in the refinery as permanent workers. Of course, what then happened, as Espinade then clarified, all will go home. So more than 3,500 permanent workers were sent home, and some 2,000 casual and temporary workers were sent home. People who worked with contracting firms, which had contracts with Petrotrin doing maintenance work and other kinds of work, they lost their jobs right away when the company shut down. The contractors would have had to reapply. Some of them may have gotten back their jobs. Some of them didn't get back their jobs as contractors. Okay, so that was what happened. The pension plan was put in jeopardy because, as you know, a pension plan works on the basis of
contribution
revenues coming in by contributions going to pay people who have already retired. When they closed the company down, everybody was severed, and therefore there's no more money coming into the pension plan, but money has to be continually paid out until the last worker, who may have been 2022, when company was closed in 2018, when he is or she's eligible to get a pension, which would mean maybe nothing when they get to 55 or whatever, they will have to also get a pension. So there's a deficit to the pension plan of somewhere between 600 million and $1 billion, which the government has to pay. The medical plan was shut down and some new medical plan was started, which didn't give the same level of benefits to the retirees and the spouse of retirees, which were their legal entitlements under their contract of employment previously. And therefore, those retired workers and their spouses now have to utilize the public health system, putting more pressure on the public health system. So there were other costs involved, okay? And the cost of closing the company and retrenching all the workers was much higher than if there was, say, a voluntary separation of employees, because you're right, quite a few, maybe 30 to 40% of the workforce would have been over 50. And therefore, had there been a voluntary separation, which the union would have agreed to in the process of the restructuring discussions, which had been established under a memorandum of agreement, which the industrial court said was a legally binding agreement on both the company and the union, and which the company violated, there would have been a restructuring which would have reduced the workforce and therefore reduced the wage bill for the company, okay, without decimating it. But why therefore, if you wanted to close the refinery, I'm going to come to some of the other economic arguments. If you wanted to close the refinery, why were all the workers in exploration and production Trinma and the workers working in Forest Reserve, Faizabad, Palo Seco, Pinal, and those areas, why were they also sent home? And I put that question to Mr. Espinay in a public forum that was organized either by AmCham or by UE. There were two public forums in which we engaged. I can't remember which one of the two, but I put that question to him. And I said, was it because you wanted to get rid of the union? He said, no. I said, was it because you wanted to get rid of the collective agreements? He said, yes. I said, well, the only way you could get rid of the collective agreements is to get rid of the union. Yes, because if they therefore had closed the refinery but left Petrotrin with E&P, rather than sending home everybody and creating Heritage and then hiring people to work in Heritage, then the union would have continued and the collective agreements would have continued. But they wanted to get rid of the union and wanted to get rid of the regulation of employment arrangements established by the collective agreement. So what now exists in Heritage and Paria, what now exists, which is one of the reasons why you had a tragic accident, that tragic incident with the 4 divers losing their life and so on, which we are waiting for the Commission of Inquiry's report, is because there was labor supply contract arrangements where workers working in those Heritage and Paria are essentially employed by a labor supply contractor, namely Kenson. You would have seen Kenson's name pop up during the Commission of Inquiry into the Paria diving tragedy. And those workers not covered by a collective agreement are working on labor supply arrangements, which are akin, a step above that of where we were in 1937, or even before 1937, as reported by the Zin Henry Commission of Inquiry into Contract Labor, which Shafiq Sultan Khan was a member of, which said that labor supply contract arrangements are akin to slavery. That is what they wanted to return to the oil fields of Trinidad. And that is what Espinay and they wanted to achieve together with people like Robert Riley and so on. The BP, so-called BP model, which is why a whole set of BP people came into Paria and Heritage, particularly Paria, to run Paria, okay, former BP managers. So that is what happened. Now, let me just go through some of the facts, okay?
So let me just ask you before you go for it, because I know you very, very familiar with it.
And
but
just in terms of the wages,
I just want to be clear. I want to be clear for me. To make it clear for me. I think one of the points that you have made, clear is that the number of persons who were actually lost their jobs and were sent home were not 1,500, but in the vicinity of 7,000. I think you have clarified that. Secondly, you have clarified that, to me, that many of them were over the age of 50, and therefore, rather than do a retrenchment, was more expensive, it would have been far more effective to use the VSAP model, which they did not use. A third point you made, because I just want to make sure your listeners are really keeping up with what you're saying. Petrotrin is made up essentially of 2 components: the exploration and production side, and the refining and the marketing side. And the marketing went to Paria, the refinery went to Guaracara, which is Patriots, and the Heritage, which is exploration and production side, E&P, went to this new company called the Patriots, and then Heritage. And what you're saying, essentially, that apart from the fact that the way in which it was done was not necessary, it was unnecessary to close down the company, and no one ever suggested or gave that recommendation that the company be set down. So everything as you are indicating, without you actually saying it, but I mean, you'd have to be kind of foolish not to follow the trend of thought, that it would appear to me that a large part of the rationale wasn't anything to do with the bullet payment that was due, which may have been a consideration. But, by the way, just before I end that, I did read in November when, I think October, November of 2019, soon after Colin Inwood gave his budget speech, and they outlined the 3 wonderful things they would do for patriotics to make it very easy for them to acquire the refinery. the issue of first call on a first priority on the lien, and which became the sticking point. He is quoted as saying a few days later, he said, "What is that? That's not no big problem. We just take that lien and transfer it to another asset. What are you making a big problem about that for? We just take it and put it on another asset." And yet that became the basis upon which they made the decision. So coming back to the point that I think that you were alluding to, which, you know, I've heard it before, but it's almost so difficult for me to believe that could, I mean, you'd close down a whole industry that is a huge part of who we are, and it affected Lake Asphalt. You close down Asphalt too.
Yes.
So where was the bitumen coming from? Lake Asphalt is a ghost town. Marabella is a ghost town. You close that all down and you didn't replace it with something. I mean, if that's not the height of irresponsibility, I don't know what is. But the thing that you did that to break the back of the power of a union, that is what would be your apparent. We have to be careful because people getting sued left, right, and center for defamation, even though we have constitutional rights under Section 4 and 5, it's freedom of expression. But I don't know. I mean, next thing, you know, you have to be careful. So I've been careful. But I am just saying that it is unbelievable. I'm serious, you know. I'm quite serious with you, you know, David. I have heard that before. And I refuse to accept that could ever be so. But I have done 2 shows. David McIntyre listening to us. He's from La Brea. I had 2 shows dealing with La Brea and the passage of the highway, which bypasses La Brea. And the issue wasn't they shouldn't have a highway. The issue is, so what did you put in place? What did you put in place? So I ask, you close it down after you got no recommendation from what you have said that it should be closed down, restructured. There are a lot of things that could have been done to salvage the company, to make it viable. And all of that was put to you. All of that was put to you. Up to 2 weeks before, you hired 2 key people to be in charge of 2 separate divisions. You broke it into 2 divisions. So it meant 2 weeks before you were not going to close it down. And I find it unbelievable. I'm telling you, and this has nothing to do with politics. This is me as a Trinidadian and Tobagonian saying that you are saying, I to believe that you wanted to close, to shut down a union and its power.
Yeah.
Well, back to you, David.
That could be your only conclusion, and the information I'm giving you, court, okay? So I'm not making up any story. Now, let me go to some of the issues around the wage bill. Now, of course, if you were to look at the registered collective agreement between Petro, which would have been registered in early 2018, yes, I think, 2017, early 2017, the union had actually served strike notice. There was no actual strike and so on. There was an interim wage settlement. There was never a final settlement, but there was an interim settlement. But those things would have had to be registered in the industrial court. And you could go and get the schedule, the dollars and cents per hour a week, or per $1,000 a month. I could assure you of that, right? You may have had skilled persons at the level of supervisors or just below supervisors in terms of senior technicians who have been working for something like that, but certainly not a laborer. I hope this union provided in a document that we produced in September, the union produced in September of 2018. They were saying that Petrotrin's wage and salary bill is 50% of its operating costs. That was not true. The wage and salary bill for Petrotrin, according to the audited financial statement for 2017, and you could look at Petrotrin's audited financial statement, prepared by the independent auditor KPMG, is just 11% of Petrotrin's cost of business. That is $2.3 billion, which includes the large number of managers and persons in activities such as HR, corporate communications. In other words, not people involved in actual producing or refining or marketing oil, out of a total expenditure of 20.8 billion TT dollars. All right. So the cost of the largest single component of its expenditure of $20.8 billion was $13 billion, 62.5%, which was the cost of buying crude oil. Now, let me make the point, because Dr. Rowley always said that the company has to import crude. Well, Karen, and your father was an old Shell man, right? Personnel manager of Shell, Waldo Nunez, the famous or infamous, depending on your standpoint, Waldo Nunez.
I say famous, but I understand why. I don't understand why. I had a Mr. OWTU George Weeks march in front of our house with a flag and call my father a wolf in sheep's clothing. Right. So I understand.
Right. I'm teasing you. Well, that Shell, which had the first refinery in Trinidad in Point Fortin, which was the original UBOT, United British Oilfields of Trinidad refinery, and then the refinery at Point-à-Pierre, which was Leaseholds Limited, Trinidad Leaseholds Limited, later Texaco. All those refineries were based on a model of imported crude oil. We have never, ever run a refinery in Trinidad, unless you're talking about the little 500-barrel refinery that they had as a test refinery in Palo Seco once upon a time. Or there was a 18,000-barrel refinery, I think, in Labre. It was Antilles, later Texaco, that was closed down in the early 70s, I think it was. We never ran our refineries on the basis of domestic. And
let me just reinforce that is in fact exactly the research that I did find, and in fact, it's not only research then; it has always been the case. They said at a maximum, our refinery would refine 165,000 barrels per day. But actually, the figures, which were based on 2016, so actually we've done a little better since then. The production from Trinidad was at 44,000 barrels per day then in 2016. I know now it's about 57,000, but there was never, ever, ever a time we refined. What did we do? We refined crude oil. What were we? A refinery. And what did we produce? Jet oil, diesel, gasoline, bunker fuel. But we would never, ever, this idea, which I find is very, very misleading. And people have to know, it is not true that there was never a time. Did you hear this? There was never, David, I have to say this. There was never a time that our refinery produced, our country produced ever. And I'm sure the model was based on that, because from the get-go, we did not have enough crude oil. We brought in the crude oil, we refined the crude oil, and what Parrot Trading is bringing in and using up our foreign exchange, and I mean, it is disgraceful. It is disgraceful, right? And let me just say this. I have to say this part, because it's disgraceful. I was really shocked to see Newman George write this letter, in September, I think September last year, I think, when he said that he had to write. You would imagine you would write a letter to the Minister of Finance, and calling him. Sometimes I forget he's the Minister of Finance, and sometimes I think the whole country think he's the Prime Minister. I wonder why. But in any event, no, are you laughing? But I'm telling you that, I mean, let's just say that's the perception. Perception is reality. And so for him to have the cojones to go and write and have that letter published, because he knew it was going to be published, to say you are not providing me with the subsidies from the National Petroleum, etc., to pay off our creditors. He says, I have creditors outside in the sea there that I cannot pay. I cannot pay. And yet they cannot pay. And we are supposed to be supplying, not only for, that's how when you go up on their website, I mean, I mean, it is tomfoolery, and they're taking us for fools, really and truly. I mean, I can't argue everything that you would say, David, but you see, on that, I have to say, you have to be taking us for village idiots or something to carve this whole thing about heritage with giving a special arrangement with Touchstone with the supplemental petroleum tax, which they are not even paying it. They've moved it from, I think, 55 to 60. You know it better than I. So you give them a blight for them to be able to produce more, give them more incentive to produce more oil, as if the oil we producing is really what kept the refinery opening. It's called a refinery. That's what it is called.
Yeah.
And when you hear Newman George saying 875 million, nearly 1 billion, that's what they call brinkmanship. I think that was the term they used in the article, actually. Brinkmanship. Bring him to the asking for this money. And then you have the Minister of Energy, Stuart Young, coming and saying, I mean, we really take a lot, coming afterwards and saying, oh, what you make all this fuss about? You don't realize that letter was written in September? Where are we now? We in December, we dealt with that already. Why did it have to reach to that point? Why did it have to reach that point? And the last thing I have to say, and I'll ask you to clarify too, this really does disturb me. You publish how wonderful Heritage is doing, what kinds of profits they're making, and then you look at the debt, because under the Freedom of Information Act, your General Secretary, Mr. Anthony Jackman, I believe his name is, you can correct me, under the Freedom of Information Act, was able to
Anthony
discover
Dobson, yeah.
Dobson, all right, within a short period. It's not even a whole year. Not even a whole year. The kind of debt that Heritage is carrying is in the vicinity of over 2 billion TT dollars, and yet you tell me about the profit you making. I try to understand. I try to understand the logic. So come, explain it to the listener how you can come out and tell me how great you're doing, what wonderful profits you're making. But by the way, you're owing about 5 times as much in debt, and you had to have your chairman write to your minister to tell him, give me the money because I cannot pay the creditors. I can't even supply our local market, much less the regional market, and we never ever refined oil for the regional market in terms of our oil. It was oil we got from other countries, which is what in the main that was refined in our petrol trade. So you go ahead and explain better than I.
Sure. All right. So you're absolutely correct. In fact, at the peak of our oil production, we were producing about 250,000 barrels of oil a day. This was in the late 70s, very early 80s. But the vast majority of that, probably 200,000 barrels or close to that, was actually 180,000 was actually produced by Amoco at the time. East Coast crude, not a barrel of which was refined in Trinidad. All of it was exported. And at that time, in the late 70s, early 80s, we had 2 refineries, the Point Fortin refinery, which was Trinidad, which was a 100,000 barrel per day refinery, and Texaco, which was at that time about 350,000 barrels of oil a day. Now, of course, the Trinidad refinery in Point eventually got closed when the companies were merged and became Petrotrin, and the Petrotrin refinery was downsized to be about 160 to 180,000 barrels of crude a day. And at the time of closure was doing somewhere about 140 to 150,000 barrels. It wasn't quite up to maximum, but it was pretty close to maximum. So you remember the government had said in trying to justify the closure that $25 billion was required almost immediately for Petrotrin. That also was false. That was a false narrative. All right.
Why is that
because
false? Tell me why.
Okay, for several reasons. First of all, they were saying the bullet payment, $850 million US, which wasn't due till 2019. Now, the interest payments on that bullet payment were being met because it didn't mean that Petrotrin was paying interest on the bullet payment bond, but the principal amount of $850 million US was due in 2019. And I'll come back to that in a moment. The $750 million bond, Petrotrin was paying both principal and interest, and I have the figures there because it was in the audited financial statements. It was paying both principal and interest on the $750 million bond. And the $750 million bond was going to be paid off, I think in 2020 20 or thereabouts. So it was very close to the end. In other words, they had paid off most of the principal and were continuing to pay the interest. Now, those bonds did not disappear. Those debts did not disappear with the closure of Petrotrin. They were simply transferred from Petrotrin to Trinidad Petroleum Holdings Limited, which is a holding company for those three companies we described, Heritage, Paria, and Guaracara. And the assets of Paria and Guaracara and some of the assets of Heritage were then put up as the mortgage for those debts. So the debts didn't disappear. And they were refinanced not once, but twice. They were refinanced, I think, recently, if not this year, maybe late last year. You could double check me on that. I don't remember the exact date, but they were refinanced. Now, why were they refinanced? They were refinanced because those bonds borrowed by Malcolm Jones, you're absolutely right, were borrowed at a time when interest rates were high. They were borrowed prior to the 2008 financial collapse, when Bears and Stearns and some of those other big Wall Street companies collapsed. After the financial collapse, interest rates went down to zero or minus, okay? And they've only, in the last year, the central banks, Federal Reserve, the Bank of England, European Central Bank have increased interest rates to something around 5-6%, depending on which central bank. And they have done that to try to push down inflation, which arose because of COVID, supply chain problems, and the Ukraine war, the bump up in the price of fuel, price of food, and so on. So they've been trying to use monetary policy, in other words, interest rates, to push down inflation. So, but anybody could go on, how many call this, right? So I could say that with some certainty. So before last year, interest rates were very low. So in 2017, 2018, and when we were meeting in the last year committee, when the Motley popped in, so this is not on record, but he popped into the meeting and we said, well, what about these bond payments? He said, nah, that could be dealt with otherwise, right? I'm not going to say anything more than what he said, but essentially said that could be dealt with otherwise. So the last year committee never addressed the issue of how to repay the bonds and the interest. But clearly what could have been done, as the government did in 2016, if my memory serves me right, or 2017, they went on a fundraiser in the United States to raise money and they got bonds. They raised money through bonds, right? A large amount, $1 billion TT dollars or thereabouts. You might remember the detail, Karen. But those bonds were raised at low interest rates. So that bullet payment bond could have been refinanced in 2018 at a lower interest rate, because that lower interest rate was somewhere, I have the figures in front of me if I could find it, was like 9.7%, right? And the other one was at some 6 point something percent. So, okay, let me just see. Right. So the 850 billion US bullet payment bond, Petrotrin was paying 9.75% interest, which was very high. But it was paying all its interest, never once did it default on its debt, right? And the 750, which would have been paid off in 2022, was a 6% interest, okay? And Petrotrin was meeting all that debt. Both of those could have been refinanced at low interest rates, so that the bullet payment was not a death sentence hanging over Petrotrin. You could have refinanced. You didn't have to therefore pay it as a bullet. You could have amortized it. In other words, stretch out the 850 million over a 4 or 5 year period at a lower interest rate, which would have eased up the cash flow of Petrotrin significantly, because Petrotrin was paying a very substantial amount in cash flow, okay, out of its cash flow on those bonds. So I just wanted to make that point. No 25 billion was required at that time. Now, let me go into some of the financial statements of Petrotrin.
I want you, let me just stop you and you go ahead on that. But definitely, I want you to address the statement made by Roger recently, but also even before that. And I myself had raised it myself in one of my shows, and I want you to raise it, address it, it's almost as if, for want of a better word, you get the feeling you almost felt like you were being hoodwinked. Because let me let you go ahead with your point, because I want to come back to what the Prime Minister said on the eve of the national elections due August the 10th of 2020, and what he said on August the 4th. And what he had to have known was the state of play regarding the financing by Guaracara for its purchase of the refinery, and what he knew had to have been the situation. And to reading it in the papers is almost as if, what happened? We ready, we ready to go. You're holding it up. So go ahead with your point, but I want to go and deal with that, because I think that's very, very important and very critical point. Because when you deal with governance, and you man who has and all that I left out, and that you have helpfully included in our discourse, you have been a man who has been committed to fair play and doing the right thing. And I could imagine, if one has those value systems at the center of who we are, then to see what happened with Petrotrin and with Patriots, it almost took them. Oh yeah, Patriotic Energies. It's almost like it took them for fools. It's almost looked like if they were being taken for a ride. But to what extent you will answer, which you will answer as fair as you can, whether really partly to blame for that happening to them.
All right. So very quickly, the 2017 audited financial statements, which were published because Petrotrin has to publish its financial statements, said that the company had a gross profit of 1.1 billion TT dollars in 2017. That's gross profits. That'd be before taxes and so on, right? And had been reducing its operating loss significantly between 2016, 2015, and 2017. And then July 19th, 2018, the chairman of the company, Mr. Espinay, in his statement accompanying the financial statements, stated that Petrotrin made a net profit of $85.6 million for the second quarter period ending the 30th of June. Okay? And that it earned $18 billion in revenue for 9 months ending June 30th, because Petrotrin's financial year was October 1 to September 30th. So for the 9 months ending June 30th, they made earned revenue of $18 billion, a 21.2% increase over the same period in 2017. So there was an improvement, which could have been better if there was a VSEP and a restructuring, yes? Although I made the point that wages only comprise 10% of the total expenditure of the company. That earnings before interest, tax, depreciation, and amortization, that is free cash flow, increased to $1.76 billion for the first 9 months of the financial year. So they had a very good cash flow position. Now, I had access to the management accounts of Petrotrin. The 2018 management accounts of Petrotrin stated that the refinery generated an operating surplus of $602 million for the first 7 months of the year. In other words, contrary to the thing that the refinery was losing, what they said, some $10 a barrel, false narrative. It was generating an operating surplus of 600 million TT for the first 7 months of the year. And of this surplus, 191 million was then eaten up by corporate overheads, because you see how the company's financial statements were structured. There was one final account statement for the whole company, because it was an integrated company from exploration to marketing, right? But expenditure for corporate expenditure was loaded into the refinery and marketing section of the company. So of that $602 million, 191 were corporate overheads, right? And then if you exclude depreciation, which is a non-cash item, then the refinery generated free cash flow of 411 million TT dollars in 7 months. For the month of April, the refinery generated an operating surplus of 213 million, and so on. And still, after cash flow was deducted, had positive cash flow of 114 million, and so on. So, and wages, salaries.
What is the point that you are With all of that data that you're throwing at us,
Yeah,
which is helpful because that's how you are able to respond when people say something and you give them data. Let's fight with the data. Facts are stubborn
that's
things,
right.
so
That's
they
right.
they don't
And
go
let me
away.
give you some
What
more.
is
Let me
the
give you a
what
little
is
bit
the
more.
what is the
Let,
what is it you're trying to tell the national community who is listening to you, giving them those figures, which they can, and where can they check that? Is it non-disclosure? Can they go on a website? Is there
no,
somewhere they
you
could
could.
go and get that?
The audited
Please tell
financial
us.
statements are out there, but you have to understand how to read the audited financial
Okay, but
statements
somebody
first.
can
Yeah,
help them to read it, right? The
yeah.
fact is that they
So
have it
yeah,
at their disposal.
yeah. So let me just say, July 2018 management accounts. So these were not audited, right? Were management accounts. The refinery generated a cash surplus of $1 billion for the first 10 months of the financial year, and the gross margin. With now, to understand refining, right? You have to look at your margin. It is not the price of crude or that you have to pay attention to. What you have to pay attention to is the price of crude plus the cost of refining, and then you subtract the price of crude and the cost of refining per barrel
Yes, your
from
profit.
the selling price of your product slate, and you describe it aviation fuel and so on, gasoline, diesel, etc., and you then get what is known as your gross margin. And the
Gross margin.
refinery was generating a gross margin of $9 per barrel as of um, 2018 or July.
As
Now,
compared
even
to, you are so familiar with this, but you have to understand you have a listening audience who are not. So
yeah,
as compared to what? $9 per barrel as compared to,
what Dr. Rowley was saying, that they were losing $10 a barrel US
okay,
for
so
every barrel of oil they refine
you're actually making $9 against
per
what you were
barrel.
saying. That's what I
Right.
want the
That's right.
audience to
That's
hear.
right.
That's what you're saying, because sometimes people get lost in the figures. But the point
Sure.
of the figures is to say, contrary to what you were being told, that you're getting a loss of $10 per barrel, when you do the breakdown to get to the gross margin, and you showed how you work out the gross margin, which will depend on whether it is jet fuel, gasoline, the different methodologies of the whatever you apply. At the end of the day, you're actually making a profit of $9 per barrel
Yes.
instead of a loss of $10
Right.
US.
And out of that, they would have then had to account for the loan payments, right? Which were
Right.
totaling somewhere over $1 billion dollars a year for those the principal and interest on the 750 and the interest on the 850
What's the
bond. Okay.
750? You have to forgive me. I know the 850 bullet payment. What's the
There were two
750?
bonds. Remember, there were two bonds. The
Mm-hmm.
first bond that they had borrowed was a 750 million US, which
Mm-hmm.
was going to be paid off by 2022. And
For
that
what
was
did they borrow it for?
for the refinery upgrades
Mm-hmm.
under the Malcolm Jones period, right? And that was accruing an interest rate of 6%. They
Mm-hmm.
then went back into the market and borrowed the 850 million US, for which they were paying 9.75% interest per
That's from
annum.
Credit
And,
Suisse.
and there would be a consortium of financials. I can't
Okay.
say, there's more than one. And
Okay.
that 850 million, the principal amount was due in August of 2019.
Right.
Yes, but I argued that that could have been refinanced to avoid a single payment of 850 million, to stretch it out over a period of time, given the fact that by 2019, most of the 750 million would have been paid off in terms of principal and interest. And therefore, you could have had a single loan to pay off the 850 million principal plus whatever balance of the principal of the 750 at a lower interest rate than 6%, given that the interest rate market was near zero in 2017, 2018. All right. But even when you discounted the loan payments, there would have been a positive um, net margin of $1.20 US per barrel, um, because the loan payments are coming out of the net, out of the gross margin of $9 per barrel. Yes, there's still
One of the things now, and the only reason I am appearing to be a little bit of what should I say, interventionist, is because I want the man in the street who obviously has been confuffled and there's a lot of clarity in their minds. One of the things that I had read, and I just want if you could answer that, because each time you have spoken about the Joint Select Committee recommendations, you have agreed there should have been the management restructuring, which means sending home people. That's a nice way of saying you have too much staff on that. I imagine that's what you would mean by that. But also what they had suggested, and I'm asking you, they said in 2016 prices of oil, because we're not talking about natural gas. I know natural gas flows from the oil, but we don't really get most of our, you can correct me, but I don't get impression that most of our natural gas comes that way. It comes from the going and doing the drilling in these various gas fields. But one of the points they did make as something that could have been done, and that was in 2016, they said what we should have done, that meaning Petrotrin should have done, is lock in contracts of either 5 to 10 year duration at a time when oil prices are low. And it falls into the argument, or what you both of us have said, is that we were not refining most of the oil. It was not our oil. We were refining oil that was coming from outside. So if we could lock it in, and even when oil prices went up to say $70, $80, but you had a contract that locked in the price of that a barrel of crude at $23, I mean, for common sense to me means that your margin, your profit margin would be even greater. And that was one of the suggestions I recall reading as one of the things that it could have been done, because in 2016, oil prices are not what they are today, which is hovering around $75, went up to $90. So what do you say to that being one of the steps that could have been taken in order to maximize the return on Petrotrin? I don't know if
yeah. So there were two things. I mean, large oil companies and Petrotrin obviously had cash flow challenges. Okay, it did not have because of the debt. So it was paying 1.2 billion TT dollars in debt payments. All right, and it was not getting the requisite benefit of the upgraded plants to improve the value of the products coming out of the refinery. The ultra low sulfur diesel project, which was one of the main plants that was built, never was started up because there was a design fault. It apparently did not meet earthquake specifications. It was never started. And that was supposed to improve the margin because you would get a higher value diesel, and therefore your gross margin in your refinery would be improved. Okay, so money was spent, but no benefit for that. You had the gas to liquids project, which is now what is it called? That plant that can't start.
Nikwan. I get it wrong, but in Nikwan or Nikwan. There is so much struggle that isn't funny. So I don't know if you can even say the operation.
So that was a huge loss. And there were also major cost overruns on the other refinery upgrade projects. Yes. So as a result of that, because there were delays and higher cost overruns and so on, which were not workers' problems, those were management and board issues and so on, governance issues. Because of that, the debt payments, which the company may have thought were possible in 2015-16, those debts weren't cleared off when they should have been cleared off, okay? And therefore, they would have had difficulty locking in certain kinds of contracts over longer periods of time. Now, it is true that those things are hedging, because you might have locked in a price and then the price may have fallen, which means you'll make a loss. So those are kind of complicated marketing decisions, Karen. That's one option. The real thing would have been for Petrotrin to have increased its production of its own crude oil from Trinma and on land, particularly Trinma, because the more of its own crude that it produced, then the better its margins would be. And it would have reduced the amount that it would have to hedge with respect to buying crude. In other words, it also had a problem of tankage. In other words, because it didn't have it, because it hadn't repaired all the storage tanks, they could only import a limited amount of crude at any one point in time for the refinery, and therefore they couldn't take advantage of the market situation in some circumstances.
Okay,
so there
now
was
I'm
some
going to ask you this. I'm going to
there were
ask you
some issues
this
there. Yeah.
because I am the man in the street really on this, and one of the things someone said to me, and when they said it said to me a few times, and I didn't believe them. To be very honest, what should I say? I shouldn't use such a strong word as I didn't believe them, as much as if that's so, how come that wasn't done? This is a person who is from the south, who is from the Point 14 area, and very much had been involved at whatever level in the oil and gas, especially crude oil. And it had said to me on many, many occasions that there's so much crude oil underground in Trinidad that they locked off, they've actually locked it off and prevented it from being utilized. And when they said that, they've told me that about 3 times, and each time they told me that, I said, well, I couldn't believe it because I said, well, if the crude oil is there and they knew what they were talking about, apparently, said if the crude oil is there, why have we not utilized that crude oil? Because we are not LNG and we are not the downstream. They are natural gas. We are crude oil. And that's what I think people need to understand is the crude oil that they use for the bitumen to prepare those roads that are just pothole heaven or pothole hell, depending on your point of view, and have people living as wards of the state. But he was so insistent that we have so much crude oil that is stored underground that we are not taking advantage of. So let me hear your answer to that.
Yeah. There was a false strategy by the Malcolm Jones board, okay, which was to put most of the capital expenditure and the debt into the refinery when they needed to invest in exploration and production first, because the extent of capital expenditure would have been lower for E&P, and the returns would have been quicker and faster in getting the oil out of the ground, okay? And that then would have given you a better cash position to invest in the refinery. And they attempted some projects which should never have been attempted. The gas to liquids was certainly one that should never have been done, and so on, which was a huge loss to Petrotrin. So there was a bad strategy, and there were also bad decisions with respect to the management of those big projects, all right? And it goes to, therefore, issues of governance. But we should have focused on increasing oil production. Now, when the partnership came in, there were meetings between the First Minister of Energy, Caroline Bacon, and the union. I was General Secretary at the time, I was also a senator. And there were quiet meetings. Angela Roger and myself met with Caroline, and then there were formal meetings. And a committee was set up. And actually, production with some very simple quick wins started to go up. But Caroline was then removed as minister and replaced by Kevin Ramnarine. And that whole joint company union effort to do quick wins to increase oil production, that came to an end, and production went flat again and began to decline. But let me, you talked about, you use the word.
Can I ask you this? No, before you go on, David, because I know you have, I'm trying as best as possible to ask the questions that I think the man in the street who somehow has been convinced that what the Prime Minister did was the right thing, and he still thinks so, really still thinks so. Are you saying, I'm asking you this question, all the projects, whether it was gas to liquid, ultra sulfur diesel,
ultra low sulfur diesel, ultra low sulfur,
right, and then the last one with Nikwan, or however you pronounce it, all of those were on, I understand, the 27 plants on the 1.1 million acres that make up Petrotrin, and that it is true that a lot of and they also said they should have an aging register, so that there are parts of the plant that don't try and repair it, like WASA, stop repairing some of them pipes, or replace it, or close it down because you're wasting money, okay? But are you saying that when there's so much pressure, okay, the Ukraine war put a little change on things when you suddenly Germany went back to using coal when the wind stopped blowing, right? But the point of the matter is, are you suggesting that the government, whoever that government may be, should not go ahead and pursue in this decarbonized world that we're going to be supposedly living in the short to medium, in the medium term for sure, that we should not pursue those projects? Because the second one, which you spoke, Samsung was the partner. I mean, I don't think you could think that Samsung was not a more than equal partner that one could have in a business of such a nature. And with the first one, gas to liquid, WGTL had no experience, nothing. They lost at arbitration on both ends. Both ends they lost at arbitration. And Nikwan, it just can't recover. Two incidents and they can't recover. But I'm asking you, if you are putting forward that the business of Petrotrin, well, let me just say this very quickly too. They're building more and more refineries all over the world. They're building more and more refineries. Venezuela is boasting now that their largest refinery, Iran, is rehabilitating it, although they haven't had more production. I just read it today in Reuters or Reuters, however you pronounce it. The largest refinery they have, they're rehabilitating it. The Middle East, 88 new refineries either being built or being rehabilitated. And Dr. Ishram Ali, the Prime Minister of Guyana, he told us, yes. Something, you remind me of myself a lot. They used to call me they call me the grammar police. And now I know why they tell me that. When any of my children speak, I quickly correct them. I said, Mommy, are you the grammar police or what? In any event, but you're not the grammar police. You're helping me to get it right. And I'm on a national show and I need to get it right and have respect for his position as the leader in Ghana with all what's going on. But he did go on record and say that we don't want your refinery. We want your refinery. We building a refinery with one. We don't only need one. And we building it. We have an MOU right now with the Dominican Republic. Your own tool. And you know what too? Your LNG plants, your trains, we don't want them either because they're too old. So what I'm trying to say is, have we put ourselves 5 years later in a position where the only way forward really is, what is the way forward? Do we reopen it and start monetizing the oil that's underground? And secondly, do we get a foreign direct investor rather than these local investments or private-public partnership with an international investor to deal with this production of a low sulfur diesel? Because I understand Carolyn Sipasa Beach, I was on a show she was on, or she was a guest, and what she said, and you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, what she had said at the time was that because our crude oil is heavy, it's not the sweet light crude that they have in Guyana, but it tends to be the heavier ones or more sulfur based, that creating this ultra low sulfur diesel plant, that intention was to take part of that sulfur that was that product that you were going to produce, mix it with our own refined oil to meet the international standards. So I'm asking you now, what if you had your druthers and you could move forward? Because it's always good to say what was wrong. What would you do now where we have found ourselves? What would you recommend?
I'll answer. But let me just give one more important piece of information. It was said that Petrotrin was a wall of the state, right? That taxpayers were subsidizing Petrotrin, that we were using some of the transfers to subsidize Petrotrin in the way that's signature. I just want to say that is absolutely false. That's a false narrative. So let me just give you the information. Between 2004 and 2016, and this is according to the Trinidad and Tobago Transparency Extractive Industries Transparency Report, okay? Between 2014 and 2016, that's publicly available. Petrotrin contributed in direct taxes to the government a total of $49 billion, TT dollars. between 2010 and 2016, Petrotrin paid $20.3 TT billion in taxes. So up until 2016, Petrotrin was the second largest gross payer of taxes to this country between 2010 and 2016. Now, only BPTT and NGC contributed more in that last period because oil prices had started to decline, and obviously with gas, NGC and BP were paying more. But in terms of, if you add the taxes paid in terms of PAYE, NIS contributions by workers, all the other contributions that Petrotrin was making to the community, and the fact that some BP and some of these companies were using transfer pricing mechanisms to drop their tax obligations here in Trinidad and Tobago, and put it somewhere else.
Yes.
I shall keep my point. Significant contributor to taxes in this country. It was not a ward of the state. Now, between 2017 and 2018, when it was closed, Petrotrin actually was not able to pay its taxes. But on the other hand, the subsidy that it should have gotten.
Why is that? Why is that? I have to ask you the hard question. Why is that?
Because its cash flow was problematic and it was paying its debt. It did not default its debt. And none of those debts were government guaranteed. Not a single debt of Petrotrin was government
contingency
guaranteed.
debt.
Right. And when they went and said Moody's and S&P will downgrade the country and we go run into all kind of crisis, absolute false narrative. I went into industrial court and gave evidence on that. Not a single piece of evidence was provided by the government. In fact, I proved otherwise. S&P, Moody's never threatened any downgrade because of Petrotrin. Okay, and the PS in finance, Vishnu Dampal, who's now High Commissioner to London, and you could add up one and one and come up with two.
Don't worry, I added it up a long time ago. He was one of two directors of the upstream, downstream, Trinidad Limited that would give the business share of natural gas to Naiquan when downstream couldn't get enough natural gas.
Right.
I added it very well. And I think I got
Senior Counsel Douglas Mendez had to say to Mr. Dampal in the industrial court that he's very sorry to say that someone of his high position misled both the industrial court and the appeal court in his evidence. And I leave it there, okay? But
you can't leave it there.
I can leave it there, right? I can leave it there, right? So in fact, Petrotrin was contributing taxes, but so there was a period of 2 or 3 years when it was not paying its taxes. But on the other hand, the government was also not paying the subsidy on gasoline to Petrotrin. So there was a net effect. The ultimate thing was that Petrotrin did owe the government more than the government owed Petrotrin, but both owed each other, right? And the last.
But how much was the difference? How much was the difference? I just want you to.
In 2017, it was about $1.8 billion in 2017. The last
that Petrotrin owed, even if they got the subsidy from the government.
Yeah. And let me just explain how that subsidy works, right? Petrotrin sells to NP and Unipet at the market price for gasoline and diesel and so on, aviation fuel. Those companies then sell to the consumer at the pump at the subsidized price. The government is supposed to give the difference between the subsidized price and the market price, the NP, which will then pay that on to Petrotrin. But the government was not doing that. So that is why the government was owing Petrotrin the subsidy, which came up with Newman George's letter, because the government continued to do that with Pario. But remember now, Pario was not earning any money like the way Petrotrin was earning to be able to sustain that subsidy. Yes, that not getting the subsidy, Pario couldn't sustain it. And let me also say that every year, Petrotrin was taking up 100% of the subsidy for LPG, $200 million a year. All right, so we have to factor that in as well. So let me come back to the issue, because I know we're running out of time now, of the question you asked. With every year that passes, Karen, it becomes more and more difficult to restart the refinery. Why? Because the cost of restarting goes up, because the state of the plant and equipment would have deteriorated more and more. When the union made its bid in 2019 for the refinery, and it was declared as the preferred bidder, It said it would spend something like 500 million US to refurbish all the plants, change out a lot of the pipelines, like the undersea pipeline that had ruptured in 2014 and caused a huge oil spill, and things that rebuild tanks or replace tanks and so on, require about 500 million to get the plant into a state of good safety and readiness to produce at maximum capacity. Now, I expect that figure would have gone up. I don't know what the figure is now, but obviously, the longer the plant stays, the refinery stays down, it's like a motor car. Or if you have your car put down for 3 months, not working, it's going to cost more. A
I'm going
house
to
that
ask you
is
a hard
empty.
question now. I'm going to have to ask you a hard question because you have to
Yeah.
understand. Anyway, I do have to explain why I'm going to ask you this. When the budget was read in October the 7th, 2019 by the minister, and it started at page 49 actually. So anybody wants to read, they can read it. And it said at that point in time, because I think there had been some discussion prior to that in August, where they had said that Patriotics Energy was the preferred bidder. And then in the budget, he then said, "Oh, look at the things we're going to do." The reason why we chose, I'm telling you what I understood them to be saying. The reason why Patriotics came out on top, we had 77 expressions of interest. Of that, only 25 of them were were companies that we could have considered. But the one and the only one that said that they were prepared to put up front in cash $700 million was Patriotics. And this is what the minister said in the speech, that no, you don't have to give us, there's no need for that. What we will do now is we are going to delay, first of all, we are going to give you, let me get it right. I don't want to get it wrong. So he said those are the reasons. But he said that they would, instead of give them a 3-year moratorium before they even had to pay their first dollar. And then when they and then when they start to start paying the further 10 years, they pay it at a market value, but that would be to complete the payment of 700 million. Now, if in fact, I'm asking you as a member of the public, if in fact the then minister, whoever it was, I think Khan may have been the minister at the time, he came out and said there were 6 issues that were 22, then it became 6, but then it came really 3. These are the 3. I think Asha Javi did a very good article on that. I'm not bringing up, but I think she does do her research well for whatever tools. I read them because I learn a lot from information. So good for you, Asha. But what it said is these were the 3 things. 1, the purchase price. Okay, that was one thing. So I think you were told, well, don't worry, you have to pay the purchase price. We're giving a moratorium on that. So then there was also the restarting of it, and they connected the restarting with this lien, which is they call it the first priority lien, and the first priority lien was on the Trinidad and Tobago Petroleum Holdings Limited, and it was 2 companies, Paria, which made no money, as you rightly said. All they're doing is bringing in refined fuel and selling it out and using up our foreign exchange, and relying on a subsidy to keep them afloat, and saying that they are getting making a profit when they owe, according to your gentleman who did the research for the Freedom of Information Act. Look at the huge debt. How could you be having a profit with that kind of debt? I don't know where it would, and you're depending on the government subsidy, I suppose, to pay off the debt. But the understanding I had from the government was this: if you could not finance that first priority lien, which was not just going to be on Guaracara, but it was going to be on Guaracara and Paria, both will be jointly responsible for any default in payments. My understanding was that the government at that point said, well, you see that I said, if that is the way in which Patriotics is going to be able to purchase Guaracara refinery, is that the government has to come and take on the responsibility. I think it was 700 million. I can't remember how much it was. It's hundreds of millions of dollars anyhow. that they were going to clear off that lien. They're going to clear off that lien so that Patriotics could then have a fresh start with startup of the refinery and so on. We're not prepared to do that. Did they not know that before? Because just before you answer me, did they not know that before? Because on August the 10th was elections. On August the 4th in Palo Seco Primary School, our Prime Minister, it's in the papers. Wait, what's wrong? I'm ready to sign. Show me where to sign. Show me where to sign. I'm ready to sign. What's holding you up? And you had Mr. Roger saying on August the 4th, before that, Mr. Prime Minister, why are you not signing this agreement, this MOU? Why are you not going ahead and signing it? And then you had, in just 2 weeks or so before the election, our Prime Minister giving the impression, at least to me, looking on as a member of the public, that there was nothing holding them back now. And that, in fact, Imbert had said in 2019, when the issue of the lien came up, he said, no, we have ways to deal with a lien. We could transfer it to something else. So he made it seem as though that was not a big deal. And yet now we learn that is a big deal. So, I mean, do you think you're hoodwinked, or do you think you allowed yourself to be hoodwinked?
Okay, so all right, so let me just try to get some of the timelines right. It would have been a little earlier that the PM said that he was ready to sign. It wasn't as so close to the election.
July, it was in July.
It was July, correct. And then the President General said, "Well, yes, we are ready to go." But and then about a week before the elections, the PM then said that he was not going to sign it before the election. Okay, I distinctly remember that because that affected my election campaign in Point-au-Pierre significantly. Okay, but sometime before June, maybe just before, I mean, I wasn't part of the negotiations, so I don't have the exact date. The union found out that the sale agreement could not proceed because the bondholders, remember I mentioned that those bonds didn't disappear into thin air when Petrotrin was closed. The bondholders then said that they were not prepared to allow the refinery and Paria, Guaracara and Paria, therefore, to be sold because they had the mortgage on those two properties, those two assets, yes? And so they made an objection, and therefore the whole negotiations got convoluted sometime prior to the elections of 2020. Mr. Imbert, when asked that question, it was been after the elections of 2020, said, I think it was Anthony Wilson that asked him at a press conference, he said, you're correct. He said that we could always transfer the mortgage to another asset of the state, but they never did that. Now, when the 2019 it was announced that Patriotic was the preferred bidder, you're right about the 700 million offer to buy. My understanding is that Patriotic put that 700 million as the offer to buy because that would have helped to clear the debt that the government had. All right, or most
but
of the
RB is saying that the bank would not commit itself. Is that while the bank said yes, they would do it, they could not get them to put it in writing.
No. Sorry, that was much later. That was much later. That RBC thing came much later. I'm talking about 2019. The reason why the union put forward an upfront thing, and they were negotiating with a bank. There was no commitment because there was no sale agreement getting ready to be signed, but they had indications from financial institutions that they could get the 700 million if the union, if Patriotic had the asset. In other words, the bank, whoever the financiers were, would have had the asset to hold in
collateral
as collateral for the 700 million, right? When the government then said, we're deferring the 700 million by 3 years, and then you have 10 years to pay off, the union, Patriotic then was focusing on the 500 million that was necessary to refurbish. And they had commitments, from my understanding, from Trafigura for the 500 million. But Trafigura also wanted to get some asset in return for that 500 million. Trafigura would have then supplied the product, the crude, to be refined, because the Patriotic was not sure they could get crude from Heritage. So the 500 million would have, Trafigura would have then had provided the crude and would have taken the product. So there would have been little challenge for Patriotic in terms of importing crude and marketing the product. A trafficker would have taken care of all of that, right? A
Because that
percentage
was
of
a
the
condition.
product.
That was a condition. They said that one of the conditions, sorry, let me just to say that part of it, apart from the fact that the restart issue and first call on first priority on the lien, they said they had to get a commitment from the bondholder that for at least 6 months after the startup of Guaracara, the refinery, that they would be supplying the national economy with all
Yes,
its fuel requirements.
and and,
That
and,
was
and
one
that had been agreed to by Patriotic. That had been agreed to by Patriotic.
yeah,
Okay,
thank God that is
so
much.
yeah, so that wasn't the issue. What then became the issue was after the 2020 elections, when the bondholders refused to give up their lien on the assets of Guaracara and Paria,
Area.
namely, right? They refused to give up those things. Although Iber said it could be reassigned, that never happened. The government then came back to Patriotic and said, you now have to also come with cash up front. So
Yes,
they moved the goalposts
yeah,
again. They moved
yes.
the goalposts
I
from
saw
no
that.
cash up front,
Yes.
3-year moratorium, 10 years to
Yes.
be paid. They then said you need to come with cash up front.
Yeah,
So
you
the
said
government
that.
changed
You
its
said
position,
that.
right? And when they changed the position, Patriotic then attempted to get some banks to give an indication. The banks gave some indication without necessarily a firm commitment because they also want to
Yeah,
get collateral, right? So
yeah.
they gave an indication that they were prepared to engage in providing the capital
That
up
is
front,
true.
but they would not give an absolutely airtight commitment
I think that I think that
unless
is
they could have gotten
very,
the asset as
you know,
collateral, and
and
the
you
government
actually
wouldn't
said,
release the asset as collateral.
David, on the
Yeah,
5th of November, 2020, shift in policy, that was the headline. And it was true because it was a complete change in what they had said to you all. Complete
that's right.
change. I mean, I don't understand how, you know what I don't understand? We're already running out of time and you have been a wealth of information. But I think from looking in from the outside, and I am political, so it's not that I'm not political, and I'm
And
certainly
so am
not.
I.
What I mean is, I'm not a supporter.
Yeah,
I'm not coming here at all to
yeah,
defend anybody. So
sure.
that's what I'm trying to say. I'm not
Yeah,
trying to defend. So I'm trying to really be the man in the street. And
yeah,
I'll be honest with you. All what you have said to me, especially what Marlene had said, you cannot underestimate the socioeconomic impact. You turning these places into ghost towns, people going hungry, the poverty rate has gone up. I mean,
yeah,
we don't understand the implications of closing down there, but we don't have time to go into it today. And I think they were very unfair to her to criticize
yeah,
her when that was her focus. Everybody has a focus. You
yeah,
talk economics, he talks social economic policy. What wrong with that? What wrong with her?
sure,
I'm talking about that. Why you
sure.
are? I mean,
Yeah,
I found an article honestly in the newspaper. I mean, whoever wrote
editorial.
it,
Yeah,
they talk about showing whatever petticoat they're wearing, that
yeah,
petticoat was on display. Because I don't
yeah,
mind reading something and saying, okay, you're making a good point. But you see an article from the very get-go, it was so biased and it
yeah,
was so somebody. I'm sorry, I like that newspaper, but when it came to that article, somebody wrote that article for them, and it was
yeah,
very unfair to attack her like that, and
yeah,
and and to make it seem as though why can't she talk about that? That is what government is about. Are you think government not about that? In the end of the
yeah,
day, when you talk about revenue, what is it for? To make the lives of people better. That's what it's
yeah,
about. To take them out
yeah,
of poverty, to give them opportunities for entrepreneurship, to give them opportunity to uplift themselves. What is it? Why do you have these entities existing if it is not to make your life better? And if she chose to, as she did, to focus on that, what was wrong with that? And
sure.
we have run out of time, but I want to say this to
Yeah,
David. I think if I can say this, having listened to you, you have been very convincing to me, and I think I did not come on to take a position, yea or nay. I was more like I'm not a doubted Thomas, but what I never understood, and I think perhaps patriotics and OWTU needs to do more effective marketing. Maybe it says you need independent marketer, not in Trinidad, maybe somebody really top of the line, because you all have not won the hearts and minds of the people of Trinidad and Tobago, that they still believe that what the Prime Minister said, no matter all what you just said to me, there's something that makes them still feel that he did the right thing. Look at that article in the Express, for example. So I would like to invite you. Are you this the end? I do. David's going to tell me I have to come off now, and I do have to come off now. But I would like to see. I'm talking to Mr. Roger. I'm talking to you. I would like to see you do much more in simplifying and then having inviting people to go and read more, and so look for the evidence that you have to support what you're saying. But you need, I think, to do more of that, in that my respectful opinion. But we have to go there.
Point taken. Yes, point taken, Karen. Let me just
David, before you go, one simple short answer for this question. Is Petrotrin really now a graveyard, or can it be revamped?
It can be revamped, and let me just close with that. We need to, and the Prime Minister went to Saudi Arabia and talked about the importance of energy security. And we have lost our energy security when we closed down the refinery, because we're now dependent on importation. And if something, God forbid, was to happen with supply chain and so on, then we will be starved of fuel. Okay, so we need to have our refinery again to guarantee our energy security. And the second point is that the Minister of Finance, in earlier statements, and Karen, you might be able to find that, somebody had sent it to me the other day, said publicly that the refinery is an important contributor to the country's gross domestic product, and therefore we would like it to be restarted. And so
you all need to do that. You all need to do more of that. Speak to the man in the street. You know, all that good stuff that you talked about. You know what you do? www. and send them to go and read it in more detail. Right? But for the man in the street, keep it simple, keep it sweet, and you will be able to persuade people, as you have persuaded me. And I don't know if I'm a man in the street exactly, but I do think you've done a good job of removing some of my own concerns that I would have had and I wanted you to answer. But thank you so much, David. Keep quiet. You know why?
We had so much people sending in messages here. There was no instant I could have interjected with the kind of outpouring of information. We'll have to invite David again.
Yes, you have to come back again, David. We have to have you back.
Sure, by all means,
yeah, we have to come back.
Yeah, by all means,
we have to have you back. And by the time you come back, I want you to talk to Mr. Roger. This is not about no. This is not about government. It's not about politics. This is about our country. Okay, you all need to do a better job. Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very much.
I sent some of the messages on your phone for you.
Thank you, David McIntyre.
And thank you, David.
Have a good evening. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye. Have a good evening.
Bye-bye.
That's the end of today's edition of Hard Talk.